and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dwayne Butcher of Flexware Innovation. I'm excited to bring to you the third and final webinar in a series of webinars that we've been calling Tech Week. These have been a series of webinars designed to keep you informed and on the leading edge of what's next. The first two webinars were recorded and they are available if you'd like to find those. You can find those at flexwareinnovation.com/events. Just a few points of orientation before we dive in. We will, like we did the last 2 days, be recording this webinar. We'll also provide links to the PowerPoint that's going to be used. We'll provide that in a PDF format. So look for an email from me tomorrow with that information. While we did set aside an hour for our webinar today, we're likely not going to use all of that time. I say that primarily to let you know that we will have time for questions and answers. So you will find a button at the top of your toolbar, the Q&A button, which will allow you to submit questions. We've had a few of those questions already submitted, and I'll be posting those in myself. But as questions come to mind, please do add those to the QA feature of the webinar. So for now, let me briefly introduce our presenter today, Jesse Wortman. Jesse is a senior automation engineer on Flexware's automation team. Jesse brings a background working in engineering for industrial companies and is now in his role with Flexware, helps other companies with some of their toughest automation challenges. He spent a great deal of time trying to understand this DCOM hardening issue, which may come out during the presentation today, but that's not an easy task. It seems, as I've talked with Jesse, it almost seems as if you're chasing squirrels at times. So, Jesse, I really do appreciate you not only being here on the webinar, but for pursuing some knowledge in this space that you're going to share with us. So I think I'll just hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Dwayne. Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and thanks everybody for taking time out of your day to come and listen here. So I'm going to give a high-level overview of what DCOM is and some of the security that is used within DCOM, and then this vulnerability that was disclosed here recently, and what this means to applications, especially in the OT space now. And so then, hopefully you'll be armed with some knowledge on how to move forward and prevent any issues at your facility. So DCOM is just a protocol developed by Microsoft that allows communications across a network between computers. So when you have a client and a server, clients can make a request and the server responds. This is done with remote procedure calls, and it's usually done behind the scenes, and people don't usually know that it's happening, or you don't need to do anything with it. But and within that communication between computers, as you can imagine, there's can be a security risk there if you have computers talking to each other and initiating processes on another computer. So there are these security levels that are built into the protocol, and they build on each other. And so there's a default, which can be any of the other levels. And so essentially what's happening, as I'll get into it later, that default level is going to be increasing from what it is today. So that's kind of the gist of it. But so this CVE, this vulnerability was described in CVE 2021-26414. And just as a quick note on what that means, that's common vulnerabilities and exposures. As you might notice, especially in the OT space, security is becoming a big thing, and there's more and more vulnerabilities released. So you'll be seeing CVE probably a lot more. And it's a database that allows people to communicate about the same vulnerability. So this vulnerability was disclosed by Microsoft in 2021, and it does require a successful phishing scheme. So don't click on suspicious emails or attachments. And then the National Vulnerability Database lists this the score as a 6.5 or a medium, and that's the common vulnerability scoring system. And mainly, there's a lot of factors that go into that score, but again, it requires a successful phishing, and then the attacker can run arbitrary code or start programs. So it's important enough that Microsoft is releasing patches, and this KB 500-4442 that describes the vulnerability, and within that lists the affected operating systems, which is pretty much every operating system that is active and supported, and from Windows 7 to Server 2019. And so they are hardening DCOM, as I mentioned before, to prevent this vulnerability from being exploited. They are going to increase the authorization level default. And so it used to be at a 2, and the new minimum is going to be a level 5, which is packet integrity. So you'll probably be hearing that a lot more. But this has been kind of a fluid situation since 2021. There's been a lot of changes, and they have a patch schedule, and they added event IDs and registry settings that you can change to work with it. And so a lot of this stuff has been changing, and I'm sure it's going to change again. And when we get closer to the kind of the end of their timeline, which is March 2023. So on that note, this is the actual timeline that they released, and originally it was supposed to be completed much sooner than what you see here, but there was some pushback from industry, and they extended the timeline. So as you can imagine, this DCOM communications is used in a lot of OT software. So yeah, I think they probably got a lot of pushback, and so that's why this timeline was extended. And it was done to give people the ability to test and see if they are going to have affected applications, and obviously giving vendors time to react. And the one thing that is new is this November 8th patch. And so that was somewhat of a surprise to me, honestly. So what that does, as you can read, is it gives it automatically raises the authentication level on the client side. So we're still testing this to see how that works, but that may relieve a lot of the issues that application software might have otherwise. So it was somewhat of a surprise for Microsoft, but that's just an example of how things are changing. But the main takeaways here are at the March 14th, 2023, when that patch is applied, you won't be able to disable the hardening anymore. So that's been kind of the push, especially with software vendors, to try to get on a timeline to where they're ready for that date. Microsoft patches. So you saw those series of patches that they have, kind of a schedule of patches that they're releasing. So Microsoft patching is kind of complicated. If you're not in that world of Windows update service, then it is kind of complicated. So there's different places to get them, but as you can see here in the slide, there's some links provided. But I would ask your IT provider which specific package you need, because you may not just install everything from Microsoft whenever it's available. You may pick and choose what you want and install them at specific times, which is, I think a best practice, especially in industry. If you have a machine that runs production, you're probably not applying all the patches, if any. But these are patches that you're going to want to apply because, especially in the OT space and out on the production floor, if you have a machine that's a Microsoft Windows machine, you probably want these patches just because of the application impacts, and vendors are going to be updating their software, so it's good to apply these. So the other thing that I mentioned that Microsoft is doing is adding these new event IDs in the Windows system log. So this is great because it gives you the opportunity to find out if your system has applications that are going to be affected by DCOM hardening. So in the Windows system log, you'll see events. There's one for the server, 10036, and then two different client events, 10037 and 38. The information might feel a little cryptic, but at least it points you in the right direction. And this is an example where you can see that there's an application, which is FactoryTalk View SE, a display client, that's requesting to activate an authentication level 2, and then the server is saying, hey, you need to be at level 5, which is packet integrity. So this is obviously an older example, as you can see the date there, that was from late last year. So with some of the this November 8th update, this error might not even occur. So this was, again, like I said, a fluid situation. That November 8th update surprised us here recently, so we're still trying to test that. But at the end of the day, depending on your patches that you have installed, things need to be at a level 5. And then the other thing that I mentioned that Microsoft was doing is these registry settings to enable or disable hardening. So I apologize, there's kind of a lot of stuff on this slide, but the main takeaways here are that you have to create this key manually. It's not automatically put in the registry when you install the updates, the Microsoft updates. So you have to manually enter this. It's not hard. You just have to put it in that path that's shown there, and then add the double word and the value. And then, of course, you have to reboot. So again, if this is a production machine, you want to plan this out. And then, of course, after the March 14th, 2023 patch is applied, you won't be able to disable anymore. So the other part of this is the registry setting to raise the authentication level. Again, this is something that doesn't exist by default. You have to add it, and then you have to reboot. So the change here with the November 8th update is that you can use a value of 2, which is different. So if it's a value of 1, then everything has to be at level 5. And if it's not, then it might not work. So, but if you change it to level 2, it would automatically raise the authentication level request to level 5. Kind of interesting that they did that. Again, a little bit of surprise there. So, but I think that's great that Microsoft did that. I think it's going to really help a lot. So again, like I said, we're testing that, and as we learn more, we can continue to update on what happens. So the impact to application software, you know, like a lot of things, it depends. So it depends on what Microsoft patches you have applied, and you know, what it's going to be application specific. So it could break or it could be fine. And a lot of the thing to remember here is that with DCOM, it's facilitating communications between computers. So if you have a distributed architecture, then that's something you have to consider. But if it's a local architecture where the server and the client are on the same machine, then that's probably fine. So big impact to applications or industrial applications are OPC-DA. OPC-DA is a legacy OPC protocol, and it's again, are you a distributed or a local architecture? So if it's distributed, it looks like this graphic where you have a client and a server. And with these hardening changes, those two machines have to be on the same authentication level. So because they're using DCOM to communicate. So if they're not on the same authentication level and you don't have this November 8th patch, then the client may have a problem communicating to the server. So if you have the November 8th patch, then it should raise the authentication level of the client to level 5, matching the server requirements if hardening is enabled. So with OPC-DA, there's it feels like a little bit easier maybe to mitigate these issues, even if you don't have the November 8th patch from Microsoft. One of the things that you can do is migrate to OPC UA, because OPC UA doesn't have the same issue. It's not the same architecture as OPC DA. Or you can bring the client and server to the same machine. That is another way to mitigate. Otherwise, Microsoft does have a DCOM configuration utility that I think has been around for a long time. And depending on the application, you might be able to use that to just raise the authentication level. But that's going to be dependent on the actual software vendor and their guidance. But as you can see on this slide, the OPC UA is not affected. And that's because there's no middleman Windows device. Your actual server is like your device, like a PLC, and or vice versa. So you have a kind of a direct path, so it's not affected. So that's why one of the suggestions is to upgrade to OPC UA.
First question that came in, some of these, as I said, were submitted externally, so I'll just run through these. How do directly affected programs break with this issue? What does that mean for it to break?
Well, if they're applications that are using DCOM and they're in a distributed environment, and you have some of the Microsoft patches applied and registry settings to enable hardening, then and that application software is not prepared for that, then it wouldn't be able to authenticate. So if the server is requiring a level 5 packet integrity authentication level, but the client is using a level 2, then the server would deny that authentication request. So that's kind of the big deal, I guess, and what Microsoft is trying to help with the November patches is to automatically raise that authentication level. But again, that's why I mentioned before, it just kind of depends on what patches you have applied and what registry settings you have.
Okay. Another question came in. I noticed on the first slide that you may have done this work in conjunction with Research PTC, Microsoft, and Rockwell Automation. What about Siemens?
Siemens actually had pretty minimal impact to DCOM just because they, I think, kind of on the back end of their software suite, they didn't really use Microsoft protocol. They're kind of more of like I guess maybe a bad analogy, but they're sort of like a Windows type, and where Rockwell might be like an Apple type, so they basically just didn't use DCOM as much. So I think there was one listed entry, but it was for like an older application of theirs, and it was just kind of like, okay, we'll upgrade to this version, and that was it.
Okay. Does this affect OPC DA for Kepware and Autosol?
Yes, so Kepware OPC DA is definitely affected. Yeah, 1 second, sorry, Dwayne, I'm getting into the meeting. Let me turn my microphone off. There we go. So I had to reboot. I had to actually kill my computer and reboot it. Let me share the presentation again, and we can get going. But yeah, so Kepware is going to be affected, the OPC DA, and then yeah, the other software is as well. But I can actually go through that in 1 second. Let me get back to where I was. Apologize, everybody, but thank you, Dwayne, for stalling while I reboot.
I'm impressed you were able to dance your way around that.
And here we go. So yeah, to your point, some examples here. Again, it was a fluid situation, so a lot of the manufacturers or software vendors reacted and with kind of this worst case scenario in mind, and so there was a lot of information put out by some where, and again, these are just examples. So there's lots of application software that could be affected, and it just depends on whether or not they use DCOM. So with all of these examples that are shown here, they require a login to access the details of the their knowledge base release. So I would encourage you to create an account if you haven't already for the software that you use, and get on their knowledge base and see exactly what details they have and follow their guidance. But again, most even with this November 8th patch, that seems like it might fix a lot of things automatically. These companies are still, their guidance hasn't changed. It's install the patches or upgrade. And then, so as I kind of mentioned before, like Aviva, Wonderware, and then PTC, Kepware, those are mostly OPC related issues. And so those are somewhat easier to mitigate in my opinion. Rockwell has a lot of different products that kind of utilize DCOM actually. And so you mentioned Siemens, where just from the beginning, they just didn't utilize that software stack on the back end, and Rockwell did. So from here on, I'll talk a little bit more about Rockwell just because of that. It seems like there's a lot more impact and they have a lot more products. So they released this product notice 1581 that details everything, and then it kind of grew from there. So there's 8 knowledge base articles from Rockwell that I know of, and then it's this original product notice, and then they actually created a table of contents to aggregate all the others. So there's a lot of information there that we're not going to go through all of it. I'll spare you of that, but there's a ton of information on where to get patches, and then how to even mitigate issues in production environments. But the main thing was this directly affected software list, which, as you can see, FactoryTalk Services is the core of most of their software suite that works on the back end. And the applications here, the way they use DCOM is not necessarily as simple as OPC-DA, and I don't know exactly how they're using DCOM, and that's not necessarily public knowledge, I suppose. And so it's how these software products are affected are highly dependent on the settings and your architecture. So again, if it's distributed, then there's a risk there. And then depending on the settings, what's required of those products when they are talking to each other, is it using DCOM or not? So again, some of them, it wasn't really detailed by Rockwell how and why it might break, but they released these lists. And so to that effect, this indirectly affected products list is a lot larger, and then includes some of the more common software products that, if you're familiar with Rockwell, that you probably use, like Studio 5000, Logix Designer, or Ars Logix 5000. And then, so for an example, like what does it mean to be indirectly affected? So if you're in a distributed environment, let's say you have a laptop and you're out on the plant floor and you want to connect to this PLC. You have Ars Logix or Studio 5000 installed in your laptop, but you're needing to use a remote FactoryTalk directory on a different server. Then that Logix and the FactoryTalk directory need to communicate if you have security policies, I guess. So that's one of the settings issues. So if you have a security policy that requires authentication to use that software, then it has to communicate with that remote computer, in this case, the FactoryTalk directory. So you might have an issue there. So the list of patches is all in one place. They at least have a nice list of all of those affected products and where to get the patch individually. But then also Rockwell has a monthly patch roll-up, which is nice. So you can get all of the updates in a patch roll-up. Well, I should say most of them. Some of them are not included in the patch roll-up for various reasons, and you can get them directly from that link. All right, so this is the last slide that I have. And so the recommendations from a high level are just to, you need to know what you have. So performing an assessment of your environment to get an understanding of what applications you have that might be affected, and then what is the architecture. And then applying the Microsoft patches is a good thing. They're actually, they give you the option to apply a patch that enables hardening or it gives the option to enable hardening so you can test and you can see those system event IDs. And then this November 8th patch should provide a lot smoother transition. So definitely apply the patches. Of course, you need to do that in a way that is planned. And then, you know, maybe if you have a way of testing those, maybe in a dev environment, or if you have a short planned downtime, that is definitely the best way to do it. And then for OPCDA, like I mentioned before, upgrading to OPC UA or moving the client and server to the same machine are some mitigation options, as well as using the Microsoft DCOM configuration utility that's been around for a long time. So one of the things I meant to mention there on those the example slide where I showed Aviva and PTC, I will say that one of them just mentioned that you could just use the DCOM configuration utility that's provided by Microsoft already, and that's fine. But the other one kind of said you need to upgrade or patch. So I don't know if, you know, the validity of requiring a patch or upgrade on some of those vendors. You just have to test it. You know, would it just work if you use the Microsoft utility and raise the authentication level? Maybe. Obviously, some of the vendors are saying that's all that's needed. Some are saying you have to patch. So, you know, I would go with the vendor's advice or test in your own environment if you can. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dwayne. I apologize for the technical difficulties there, but if there's any more questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yep. So a few more did come in externally. So are there any known impacts kind of in and around the IoT space?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the application software. And again, I would have to say probably less likely, just because IoT tends to be a little bit newer. So they're more likely to be using OPC UA if they're using that type of protocol. But again, you know, it depends on the architecture, and it depends on the application software, and is it using DCOM or OPC DA. So yeah, like a lot of things, it depends, but I would say it's probably a lower impact in IoT just because it tends to be a newer area technology.
And I'm sorry if you've already addressed this, but does this DCOM change have any impact on legacy OPCDA systems?
Yes, so legacy OPCDA is affected by DCOM hardening and distributed architectures. So again, with the client and server being on different machines, they would use DCOM to communicate. And so if they're not at the same authentication level, then yes, there would be issues. Again, there's this November 8th patch from Microsoft that might alleviate that. So I encourage you to use that patch and do testing offline as much as you can.
So you've kind of thrown out some of the some suggestions and so forth for managing risk, but just from a larger perspective, this person is asking, do you have any other strategies for minimizing the risk due to this DCOM hardening?
Yeah, I think generally doing an assessment is probably the first place that you should start, and get an understanding, a list of what applications you have, and you know, knowing whether or not those are using DCOM or not, you may not know, but the other thing is applying that first round of patches from Microsoft. You will get these system event IDs that could give you some clues. So get a list, do an assessment. Do you have distributed architecture? And then you know, check with your software vendor. And I think, you know, it's applying the Microsoft patches. I think those are great, especially the November 8th patch.
Okay. So Bob asks the question, does one have to apply all the Rockwell patches to all related linked systems simultaneously, or are there strategies that allow you to do that in phases or stages?
Yeah, well, that does get a little complicated. So with Rockwell, lots of products, it's definitely better to do it all at once. So if you can plan a downtime where you're applying the patches. You can just apply the patch roll up. That's pretty painless. You can definitely do that. If you're in a highly complex distributed architecture, in a situation where having downtime for every single area at the same time is just not possible, there are certain steps that you could take to try to minimize that. But certainly the easiest thing to do is plan downtime so you know for sure. But again, I think this November 8th patch is really going to help a lot. So if there's any way to apply that patch and then enable the hardening and apply the keys, I think that if you can do that in an environment where it's safe to do that, or during a planned downtime, I think that's a really good thing to do, especially right now while you can still disable hardening. But I think that November 8th patch would, with automatically raising the authentication level of clients, is going to really ease this transition.
Well, Jesse, that's all the questions that have come in for now. I'm sure there are more questions that maybe haven't been addressed. You put on here, what is Flexware doing? I know that you're busy. You're actually consulting with some companies and helping them to mitigate the risk. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out directly to Jesse, or if you don't have his contact information, feel free to touch base with me and I can put you in touch with Jesse or any of our other subject matter experts. So with that, Jesse, I just want to say thanks. It looks like you've done hundreds of these webinars, the way you handled the technical difficulties with precision. So thank you for being able to multitask in that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the opportunity to join. Appreciate it. It was
yeah.
fun, even with the technical difficulties. You gotta keep things interesting, spice it up. So
absolutely, get everybody's heart rate racing. Just a couple of notes. As I said earlier, we will be making the video recording available. So look for an email from me tomorrow morning with a link to the video recording as well as the PowerPoint that Jesse referenced here. And on that PowerPoint, a lot of the links and so forth that he referenced, we'll make those actually live links so that you can get directly to some of the websites that he referenced there. And just a suggestion, you might consider using this recording as a lunch and learn for your team. Maybe bring in your team into a conference room, watch the recording together, and maybe discuss what some of your approaches might be for addressing this. And again, feel free to reach out to Flexware if you have any questions. So for now, thank you, Jesse. Thanks for everyone who tuned in, and we'll sign off from there. Have a great day.
all right, thanks everybody.